They say World War II was fought with tanks, planes, and battleships, but buried in forgotten reports from China are hints of another weapon, the dead themselves. Japan's scientists, desperate to turn the tide, searched Manchuria and occupied China for older, deadlier plagues, hoping to unlock new ways to spread disease. They tested chemical and biological agents on prisoners and civilians, searching for pathogens that could sicken faster, kill quicker, and terrify whole populations. But the stories claim these experiments did not just sicken or kill. Sometimes they changed people. Victims twisted into violent shells of themselves, consumed by rage, attacking anyone nearby. Whole towns, even cities, were erased not only to punish resistance, but to stop the infection from spreading. The official record calls these atrocities, but what if they were something else? What if in the final years of the war, Japan unleashed not just plague, but a weapon that turned the living into the undead, a weapon that turned against its masters and became the enemy of all? This is the hidden history of World War II, a war fought not only between nations, but between the living and the undead. By the late 1930s, Japan's empire stretched across much of East Asia. In occupied Manchuria, the Kwantung Army established its most secret program, Unit 731. Officially named the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, Unit 731 was created in 1932 and based in Harbin. Behind its sterile title lay one of the darkest projects in military history. Its mandate was to develop biological and chemical weapons. Researchers experimented with plague, anthrax, cholera, and poison gas. Prisoners were infected, dissected, and used in field trials. Entire villages in Manchuria and northern China were targeted to test the spread of disease. This much is known, confirmed by testimony and fragmentary records. But within Unit 731 there was a quieter branch, almost erased from history. Scattered references call it Section 14. Officially, it was an archaeological unit. Unlike the other divisions which focused on laboratories, production, or weapons testing, Section 14's task was excavation. Its teams fanned out across occupied Manchuria and northern China, opening plague pits, probing mass graves, and surveying tombs sealed for centuries. On paper, the purpose was simple, to study the history of disease. But Section 14's work soon went far beyond archaeology. Their excavations followed a deliberate pattern. Each site was chosen for its age, its legend, and its whispered connection to death. First came the plague cemeteries, burial pits sealed since the Ming dynasty, over 5 centuries old. Folklore claimed the dead in these pits did not rest easily. Section 14 unearthed entire fields of bones, creating them for shipment to Harbin. Next were the battlefield graves, mass burials from the Mongol invasions and earlier dynastic wars. Thousands of bodies had been left to rot in shallow trenches. When Section 14 disturbed the soil, the remains were twisted, blackened, and incomplete, yet still considered valuable samples. Still unsatisfied, Section 14 turned to the dynastic tombs. Aristocrats and nobles entombed with lacquered coffins, mercury-lined chambers, and stone seals, bodies preserved in defiance of time. In one tomb near Datong, records claimed that a corpse bled when cut, though it had been buried for nearly 1,000 years. And finally, they searched the permafrost of Manchuria. In the frozen ground of Jilin, men buried half a millennium earlier were found unnervingly intact, their flesh disturbingly whole. These remains were transported under armed guard to Harbin, guarded more closely than any other discovery. Plague pits, battlefield graves, dynastic tombs, and frozen burials. Section 14 had assembled a collection that blurred the line between archaeology and horror. Exactly what became of these finds has never been revealed, but in the silence of erased records and vanished names, one truth remains. Section 14 uncovered things never meant to be disturbed. Across the centuries, China and Manchuria left their own warnings about the dead. Legends told of plague pits where bones shifted at night, and the ground was said to breathe. Northern epics spoke of warriors locked in ice, their bodies unspoiled by time, waiting only to be disturbed. Taoist scrolls described the Jiang Shi, the stiff dead corpses that rose when burial was broken, moving without thought but never at rest. Even Imperial chronicles written after great wars spoke of mass graves that remained uncanny for generations, where the remains of the fallen were said to stir when uncovered. These were not instructions from the living, but echoes from the past, warnings left in story and record carved into memory. But Section 14 ignored them, reducing legend to superstition. They broke seals, unearthed remains, and carried them to Harbin. Warnings had been given. Warnings were buried in history itself, and when they were ignored, what followed could not be contained. In Harbin, Section 14's discoveries were handed over to the laboratories of Unit 731. The officer placed in command of the project was under intense pressure from 731's leadership, ordered to deliver results that could turn the war in Japan's favor. Unit 731 already had plague, anthrax, and cholera. Each could kill, each could spread, but the army demanded more. They wanted something faster than cholera, deadlier than plague, a sickness that could roll through an enemy city in days and collapse morale without a single shot fired. A limited test was ordered. No more than a handful of prisoners were exposed. The requirement was simple: did it kill? Within days, the subjects were dead. Lethality was proven. But observers reported something they could not explain. The corpses did not remain ordinary. Their skin blackened, their features twisted, their bodies stiffened in unnatural ways. The decision was made at once. No autopsies, no study. The bodies were burned immediately, judged too dangerous to handle further. What might have been discovered was erased in fire. By the middle of 1944, Japan's position in the war was deteriorating. Desperate campaigns were underway across central China as the Kwantung Army and its allies fought to seize the railways and link their occupied territories. The weapon was ready for the field. For the army, it was enough. The weapon killed, and that was all that mattered. Bombs were prepared, filled with the new agent, and dropped alongside high explosives to disguise their purpose. A week after the bombing, reconnaissance flights still reported silence. The city lay motionless, its streets filled with corpses, but no signs of life. Scouts were dispatched to recon the outskirts. They did not return. What happened next is unclear. The surviving records are contradictory. Fragments suggest that an entire division was recalled from offensive operations and whole bomber squadrons redirected, all toward the same silent city. But the records do not mention which division it was. The official rolls give no certainty, only the suggestion of a major force committed to the ruins. What happened inside would mark the beginning of something far darker. The division's orders were clear: encircle the city and allow nothing to leave. No civilians, no animals, no one. They were to hold their positions until a detachment from Unit 731 arrived. The men were pulled straight from the front, with no time to issue masks or protective wear. Shortages across the army made such equipment rare in any case. The detachment's task was to monitor conditions and confirm whether the new weapons still lingered in the open. Only after their report would the army be cleared to enter the city. But before that report could ever be made, the perimeter came under sudden attack. There were no warnings, no signals, only waves of disfigured figures rushing from the ruins with fearless, rage-filled speed. They showed no concern for their own survival and were difficult to stop. Even after multiple rifle shots, many continued to stagger forward, half moving until bayonets or close-range fire finally brought them down. When the detachment from Unit 731 arrived, they found the perimeter already engaged. Reports suggest they examined the bodies of the attackers and may even have witnessed one of the outbreaks firsthand. Whatever they saw, the response was immediate. Orders went out for firebombing of the city. But Japan in 1944 was already stretched thin. The wider campaign consumed men, machines, and munitions. Bombers flew, incendiaries fell, and parts of the city were set ablaze, but supplies were limited. Some districts burned fiercely, others were barely touched. The attempt to burn the city out was real but incomplete. After the first raids, Unit 731 conducted preliminary tests around the perimeter. The results showed no trace of the weapon in the air. Only then was an incursion authorized. Before the order could be carried out, artillery was brought forward. Reconnaissance aircraft circled above, preventing fire onto the largest buildups of what the soldiers had begun to call Oni, demons. Wherever these gatherings were sighted, shells followed, collapsing buildings and blasting apart entire blocks. Pilots flying low reported an unnerving detail. The figures below seemed to turn upward, as if aware they were being watched. The bombardment intensified, but the sense that the Oni were staring back never left the men in the air. After the artillery had depleted most of its shells, the division was split. Half remained outside the city to maintain the perimeter, while the other half was ordered to advance. From every sector of the encirclement, units pushed inward. Their method was deliberate. First, the streets were secured, defenses established at each intersection, and only then did squads move to clear the buildings one by one. The work was slow, brutal, and constant. At first, resistance from the Oni was scattered, almost minimal. But the further the troops pushed toward the center, the stronger the attacks became, as if the heart of the city itself was alive with them. Inside the city, the mission collapsed, shifting from offensive to defensive. What began as eradication turned into a struggle to survive. Every street was contested, every block attacked again and again, until the siege itself hardened into a fight to stay alive. Beyond the ruins, the perimeter held fast. Orders were explicit: no withdrawal and no reinforcements sent inward. Their role was containment only, to prevent anything from escaping, even as the men inside faced the growing tide alone. The artillery batteries, nearly out of shells, were dragged forward for direct fire into the streets. What little ammunition remained was poured into the front lines, supported by scattered bombing runs overhead. The measures were not part of any plan. They were acts of desperation, meant only to keep the siege from breaking entirely. This is where the recovered records end. Whether lost, erased, or deliberately hidden, Unit 731 leaves no further trace of what followed. We know what happened in the city, at least up to a point. But what came after, how it ended, how it was covered up, or what traces remained, disappears into uncertainty. Had it not been contained, the course of the war and perhaps the fate of the world might have ended very differently. Yet questions remain. There is no evidence to prove whether the victims of this weapon could spread it further, or how far the infection might travel. Some speculate that the Soviet invasion of Manchuria in 1945 may have been more than a campaign against Japan, that it was in part a suppression of a wider outbreak. If true, it would explain why the once feared Kwantung army collapsed so swiftly, as if already broken by something far worse than war itself. History records the end of a war, but not always the end of what was unleashed within it.